The U.S. home front. January 14th, 1942, Executive Order 9066 will be passed by President Roosevelt. What it's going to do is it's going to create the war relocation camps for Japanese Americans. The belief was that these Japanese Americans would aid the enemy, that they would help the Japanese to attack the United States. And so we are going to deal with them. We are going to put them in war relocation camps. Now this will be challenged in 1944 with the U.S. Supreme Court case of Korematsu versus the United States. And the Supreme Court will make the determination that the camps are legal and that the suspension of civil rights are legal for security reasons, because this was, as Korematsu saw it, a violation of your First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and your 10th Amendment rights, rights of the people, right, or Ninth Amendment rights of the people. So what we do is we remove Japanese Americans from their homes and we relocate them to 10 internment camps in Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. It's kind of interesting that Hawaii does not have any camps, even though most of the population in Hawaii are Japanese American citizens. And so we removed them, and most Japanese Americans lived on the West Coast, so they are in California, Oregon, Washington, and we removed them to Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. About 100,000 Japanese Americans will be moved, and when they are moved from their homes, they lose their homes, they lose their possessions. People come in and take it, even though they really weren't authorized to do that. They do. Some of the young men will choose to join a special U.S. Army unit, performing with very high honors. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team is mostly Japanese Americans. They had a very high death rate, but they serve in the European theater, and they're the most decorated unit of the entire war. So it's kind of hard to justify that, you know, they were going to betray us to the enemy when they serve with such honor in our own military. Now, 2/3 of the internees, the people who were locked up, were Nisi. And Nisi are native-born American citizens who happen to be of Japanese descent. So they were people that were born here. They weren't even immigrants, recent immigrants from Japan to the U.S. And so questioning their loyalty was something that was, you know, a little sketchy. Why did we question it? Only 10 people in the time of the war were tried for treason as spies for Japan, and all of them were Caucasian. None of them were Japanese Americans or even Japanese. In 1988, the U.S. government will formally apologize for its behavior during World War II, and we will pay the survivors a stipend of $20,000 to make up for the loss of their possessions and businesses and whatnot. Other minorities in the war effort, blacks will also see some service time in the military, so we're looking at military service here. Their duties will mostly be behind the lines, for example, laborers and cooks and clerks, medical staff, that kind of thing. Some will serve on the field in segregated units, but they often had white commanders, and so, but they are kind of seen as not being as good as the whites. Mexican Americans, 500,000, will join the armed forces. They also will serve in segregated units, although not all. There will be some who are integrated within military units. They will see a lot of heavy action in both Europe and Asia. Asian Americans, we already talked about the Japanese, how they had their own regiment, and 1/5 of adult male Chinese Americans will also join. So 20%. 33,000 Japanese Americans will join, and several thousand will serve as spies and interpreters in the Pacific Theater. Native Americans will also have a role in this war. 25,000 will be enlisted in our armed forces. It's one of the first opportunities that they actually have to leave the reservation system and to meet non-Indians. For some of them, it's the first time they see white people. The Navajo will have a special role in World War II. They become code talkers. They have a special role because of their language. We often spoke in code when giving communications because we didn't want the Japanese to figure out what we were doing, and they were always able to break our codes. However, we decided to use the Navajo because the Navajo language was never written down, and so the only Navajo knew how to speak Navajo, and so they used their language to give radio messages, to communicate across lines and whatnot. And so they would have to reinterpret, how they talked about things. If they were talking about a tank, the Navajo language doesn't have a word for tank. Instead, they would talk about maybe a turtle, or grenades were rocks, or airplanes were birds. So they found a way to interpret it. Women will also serve in World War II. The WAAC, or the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, will be created, and it was supposed to let women into the armed forces for duties that they could do better than men, things like cooking and cleaning and laundry and medical services. However, these women would not receive the same rank, pay, or benefits as the men. It finally gets passed through Congress, and eventually 250,000 women will serve in non-combat positions in World War II. But that's not the only role that women will play in World War II. Rosie the Riveter is a popular image that was created by Norman Rockwell, and it depicted the stereotypical workwoman, very brawny yet feminine sort of person, because 7 million jobs are going to open up because men are leaving to go to the war or are fighting or are in the military, and so these jobs still needed to be performed, and so women will step up into those roles. And Rosie the Riveter was there as a popular image to try and get women recruited, that it was okay to be working with a welding machine or with jackhammers or whatever, because you could still be feminine at the same time.